Hello and welcome. You have found a quiet place and a little time, and that is enough. If it helps, let your eyes rest closed, or let your gaze soften on something still in the room. Nothing here needs your hurry. Take a slow breath in, if that feels easy. Let the breath leave you without effort, like mist lifting when the morning decides it has nothing to prove. As you breathe out, let your shoulders soften. You do not have to hold them. Let the weight of the day ease away from your neck, down along your arms, until your hands rest as they are, unclenched, unneeded for a little while. Another breath, if you like. The space between one breath and the next does not ask anything of you. Tonight we travel only in imagination to one of Ireland's oldest and gentlest mythic families, the Tuatha Dé Danann, often remembered as a people of skill and light, associated with mist and hidden places, with treasures that sound like poems and cities that sound like dreams. We are not marching toward battle as a thing to fear. We are leaning toward a legend that understands arrival the way dawn understands the horizon. Slowly, without argument, with a pale brightness that does not need to shout. Picture mist first, because this story loves soft edges. Imagine an island coast at a distance where sea and sky agree to blur, where the air carries salt and something like cool silk against the cheek. Imagine light that does not come from a single source but seems to gather, the way light gathers on water when the day is quiet. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in many tellings, arrive in Ireland from the north, carried in dark clouds across the sea, or descending in a wind that feels less like weather and more like intention made gentle. You do not need to choose which version is true. Myth does not ask for a courtroom. It asks for a listener willing to drift. If your mind begins to name tasks or replay conversations, you need not push those thoughts away. Notice them the way you might notice a gull crossing high above. Then return your attention to the mist, to the breath, to the slack in your shoulders, and the quiet weight of your body where it rests. Take another slow breath. And with the exhale, imagine your shoulders dropping a fraction more, as if someone kind had placed warm hands there and said, without words, you may rest now. The place where your shoulder meets your arm is a small junction that often carries tension without announcement. You do not have to fix it. Breathe toward it, the way you might breathe warmth into cold hands, and let the muscles answer in their own time. In Irish legend, peoples are sometimes more than armies. They are crafts, they are music, they are the willingness to remember that the world can be skillful without being cruel. The Tuatha Dé Danann belong to that kind of memory, a name carried for centuries, reshaped by tellers, softened at edges where sharpness might wound a listener. For tonight we let the tale be gentle. We let conflict become distant thunder rather than a storm overhead. We let the she-mounds and hidden halls be shelter rather than riddles meant to frighten, because you are here to drift, not to brace. You do not need to memorize every genealogy before you rest. The myths connect the Tuatha Dé Danann to older stories of otherworldly cities, to teachers and druids, to a sense that Ireland's landscape was never only soil and stone, but also threshold. A place where the visible and the subtle could meet without needing to argue about which was more real. For our sleep-friendly path, we need not catalogue every manuscript debate. We can understand that a people remembered as gods in some English summaries were, in Irish imagination, something closer to extraordinary inhabitants of the island's story world, powerful, beautiful, flawed in human ways, bound to places and objects that carry meaning the way music carries meaning, without translating cleanly into a single sentence. Imagine yourself standing on a hill in early morning, not to conquer anything, only to feel the world widen. Grass holds dew, the horizon is a line drawn faintly forgiving. The air feels like it could hide a doorway if a doorway wished to stay hidden. That is the emotional weather of the Tuatha Dé Danann in many retellings. Not neon certainty, but a luminous uncertainty that invites patience. If your body has tightened again around the shoulders, breathe and let them widen. There is no test in this arrival. There is only the mist's patience, the morning's softened light, the sense that stories about belonging can be told without forcing the listener to flinch at every turn. The name itself is a kind of music. Tuatha speaks of a people, a tribe, a community. Dé Danann links them to Danu, a mother figure in the mythic genealogy, a name that feels like river and ancestry at once. Scholars discuss details, poets keep the sound. For sleep, you can let the syllables rest on your tongue like a lullaby you do not have to understand fully to feel soothed by. When you imagine Ireland in this tale, let it be wide enough that your thoughts do not bump the edges. Let there be silence between sentences in your mind. If a memory rises, let it rise like a bird, circle once and glide away. You can always return to the hill, to the breath, to the softening at the tops of the arms where the day used to sit. Long ago, in the time of legends, a land already had inhabitants when new arrivals came. Irish myth is not a single tidy timeline. It layers like sediment, like stories told in winter when the night is long. The Firbolg are remembered as an earlier people, associated with bag-like burdens in some etymological tales, but we need not linger on labels. For our gentle path, we need only understand that arrival can be complicated, that a new chapter does not erase the old page, but writes beside it, sometimes in softer ink. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in many versions, bring 4 cities from the north, or 4 treasures from those cities, depending on how the story wants to breathe. Findius, Gorias, Murias, Falias, names that sound like distant bells. From them come 4 objects that will echo through Irish imagination like refrains. The Lee-U foil, the stone that cries out under a rightful king. The spear of Lugh, swift and terrible in older tellings, which we will translate into gleam and purpose rather than gore. The sword of Nu-Ada, bright with authority, and the cauldron of the Diishga, generous, bottomless in the way love can feel bottomless when it is safe. You do not need to hold each name like a key you must turn. Let them be lanterns placed at intervals along a path you walk slowly. There is a kindness in arriving somewhere that does not require proof. You do not need a ticket in this telling. You do not need to know every variant of the legend, every scholarly debate about sources. Your presence is enough. Your willingness to drift in thought without straining. Your permission to let the day dissolve a little at the edges. Picture the mist as a veil that is not meant to hide cruelty, but to soften outlines, the way a bedroom lamp softens a corner. Picture light as something that can touch skin without interrogation. Picture the sea as a road for clouds, a wide blue-grey field where intentions travel without hurry. When the tales speak of battles, sleep-friendly narration can choose distance. 2 armies as 2 weather fronts, the day heavy with expectation, the land holding its breath. We will not rehearse wounds. We will notice courage as steadiness, conflict as something that moves through history the way storms move through seasons, leaving stories behind like broken branches that later become nests. If your hands want something to do, let them rest. If your feet want to pace, let them be still instead, supported by whatever holds you. the body knows how to soften when the mind stops insisting. Give it a little trust. Another breath. Shoulders wide and loose. The mist holds its shape without needing praise. We are nearly at the kind of arrival that needs no gate. The legend of the Tuatha Dé Danann is a long story in its full form, crossing battles and love affairs, touching exile and return, brushing against the she-hills where time behaves more like a spiral than a line. Tonight we will walk only as far as calm allows, letting years pass in phrases rather than in minutes, letting wonder be real without becoming sharp enough to cut. You can feel, if you like, a slight widening in your chest as you breathe, as if the morning had made a little more room inside you. You do not have to hold that feeling. Let it spread and fade, the way light spreads and fades, the way stories begin in dimness and become clear only gradually. And now that you have arrived, not with a shout but with a long exhale, we can let the tale unfold in its own time. The way mist moves when it has nowhere urgent to be. There will be cities and treasures, kings and healers. But all of it will come gently, like footsteps on wet grass. Like someone speaking in the next room, voice low enough that you do not have to lean forward to catch every word. Rest here a moment on the hill, wherever your mind has placed you. Feel the earth steady beneath you. Feel your breath steady within you. When you are ready, the story will continue, not to startle you, but to accompany you, the way still air accompanies a fern, holding its shape without breaking it. In the shelter of legend, before the names become a crowd, there is ordinary wonder, or so we like to imagine, the small repeated work of making a new home in a land that already knows its own songs. Myth does not always pause to describe breakfast, yet we can imagine steam rising from a simple pot, bread softened in milk, the quiet competence of hands that know how to keep a small fire from shouting smoke into the sky. The Tuatha Dé Danann enter the tales as people who bring skill as luggage, smithcraft and poetry, healing and law, music that can make sorrow bearable and joy less frantic. No a da Getlam, in many versions, leads them as king, his epithet pointing toward a silver hand, a detail that sounds like moonlight translated into anatomy. In the fuller myths, he loses a hand in conflict and receives a wonderful replacement crafted by a physician poet, a story of restoration told around loss. For tonight, we need not linger on the wound's specifics. We can understand the emotional truth that leadership sometimes requires wholeness in the eyes of a community, and that wholeness can be remade, not only born. The Li U foil, the stone of destiny, stands at terra in imagination as much as in stone. A witness that chooses sovereignty with a cry. In a sleep story, we let the cry be something other than a shock. We let it be a sound, like a bell heard underwater, distant, inevitable. A confirmation that the land itself has preferences about care. You do not need to believe in literal stones that shout to feel the gentler idea. That leadership is not only human ambition, but responsibility toward place. The Dahq appears as a fatherly immense figure, associated with a club that kills and revives, with a cauldron that feeds all, with a harp whose music orders seasons. He is sometimes comic in later folklore, but the root is abundance, the sense that the earth can be generous when greed does not steal the song. For sleep, we let his harp be soft strings in a warm room, not a spectacle demanding applause. We let his harvest be the slow generosity of apples, the patient readiness of grain. Di Un Kicht and his kin move through the tales as healers, surgeons of a mythic register, which can sound violent if described clinically. We choose the direction of compassion, The idea that bodies can be tended, that skill can repair what conflict breaks, that care is a kind of magic older than argument. BRIGID threads through Irish tradition in many forms, goddess and saint braided together across centuries. In the mythic company of the Tuatha Dé Danann, she carries fire and poetry, healing and smithwork, as if creativity and nurture were not opposites but siblings. You do not need to separate every historical layer tonight. You can let her name be warmth, a hearth-steady breath, a line of verse spoken without hurry. Lugh appears as a young man of many gifts, Samildanac, master of arts, the kind of figure who makes excellence look like ease, which can be both inspiring and exhausting in mortal life. For Sleep, we emphasize his brightness without turning him into a contest. His spear can be a line of light across water, swift intention, rather than a catalogue of harm. The myth set the great confrontation at Mag Tuair U, a plain that becomes a stage for first battle and later battle, first against the Firbolg, later against the Fomor Uns, the chaotic forces from sea and storm in many tellings. Names and sequences shift across manuscripts. Poets rearrange. For our gentle path, we need not pin every movement to a map. We can understand Mag Tuair as a place where Ireland's story asks a question. What kind of power deserves to rule? The power of brute-taking, or the power of craft, law, and fertility tied to the land's well-being? When the Firbolg fight, the tales remember courage on both sides, a detail that matters emotionally, even when simplified. Sleep-friendly narration can treat armies as tides. Meeting, pulling back, leaving the shore changed. We can note grief without painting it in close-up. We can note bravery as steadiness, not as adrenaline meant to keep you awake. The first battle ends with the Firbolg defeated. The Tuatha Dé Danann offer them a portion of Ireland, a mythic partition that echoes through later history in different clothing. Whether read as political fable or pure fantasy, the emotional shape is compromise, continuity, a sense that defeat does not have to mean erasure. For a listener trying to drift, that shape can be comforting. The idea that stories can include aftermath that is not only punishment. No Ada's eligibility for kingship, in many versions, depends on physical completeness. Thus, the silver hand, beautiful and yet initially insufficient in the law's eyes, becomes a paradox that myth loves. What is true kingship? The body as it was born, or the body as healed? When Nuu Ado yields place, sometimes to the outsider Bress, the tale turns toward justice and hospitality, toward what happens when a ruler forgets gratitude and fair treatment. Bress's Fomor Un connections bring the next storm, not as moral panic, but as consequence told in slow waves. If your thoughts drift toward your own experiences of fairness, of leadership, of moments when law felt too rigid for compassion, let those thoughts be held gently, not examined like a wound that needs poking. The tale offers patterns, not verdicts about your life. The Fomor Uns in many tellings are not merely evil sea pirates. They are forces of blight and harsh tax, mistreatment and cold hunger, the mythic face of winter's cruelty and exploitation. Baelor of the evil eye becomes a figure of devastating gaze, a metaphor sleep stories can translate as a kind of withering attention, the opposite of the Tuatha Dé Danann's luminous craft. You do not need to visualize horror. You can imagine a darkness that retreats when light organizes itself with care. Lugh's arrival at Tara, in many versions, is a scene of cumulative skill. At each gate, a craft is claimed, until the young man proves himself not as a single hammer blow, but as a symphony of competence. For Sleep, we let the gates be soft thresholds, each one a question answered without boasting. We let the court's suspicion melt into recognition, the way mist melts when the sun finds its angle. The second battle at Mag Tuair U becomes the great set piece. Strategies, songs, weapons, and transformations. Mythic combat includes elements modern readers find surreal. Warriors who drown in lakes raised from a drink. Stones thrown like philosophical arguments with mass. We will not chase every bizarre detail. We will walk beside the emotional rhythm. Fear, preparation, courage, the sense that the young and the old must cooperate. That a woman's prophecy can be as crucial as a soldier's arm. The figure of the Morrigan appears in this landscape as a complex presence. War and fertility, crow and cow, sovereignty's fierce face. For Sleep, we do not reduce her to a slogan. We acknowledge her power as part of Ireland's long comfort with contradiction, with a goddess who refuses to be only gentle, because the land refuses to be only gentle. Yet, even she can be narrated without graphic violence, as storm logic, as necessary boundary, as the voice that says some trespasses will cost. When Lugh faces Baelor, the myth compresses fate into a moment. The evil eye opens, destruction looms, Lugh acts. Sleep-friendly tellings can widen the moment into slow motion. Light against darkness, skill against fear. The sense that one well-placed act can change weather. You do not need to see the wound to understand the release. Winter breaking, cruelty losing its grip, the island breathing again. Around the edges of the great battle, other figures move with quieter instruments. Ojima, in many tellings, is more than a background name. He is eloquence made person, a bridge between force and meaning, the sense that a people must be able to speak their own story, or else be spoken for by strangers. In a Sleep story, we let his labour be ink and breath, not argument. The idea that words can steady a frightened hall the way a railing steadies a stair. Nikitune's well and its sacred hazel, often told in adjacent myths, belong to the same imaginative family as the Tuatha Dé Danann's world. Water, trees, knowledge dropping like nuts into pools. Salmon circling wisdom until someone patient enough receives it. You do not need to connect every stream tonight. You can let the image be enough. Knowledge as something that ripples outward, not something that must be seized in a single frantic motion. There are also silences in myth that matter as much as speeches. The night before a battle, in imagination, can be a long exhale. People checking straps, not because they love war, but because care reduces accident. Someone shares water. Someone jokes softly because fear needs a valve. Someone sits alone and does not apologize for needing stillness. These human-sized moments do not always survive in summaries, but they belong to the emotional truth of the tale. That courage is often communal patience dressed in urgency. Women move through the Mag Tuair narratives as physicians, as queens, as strategists, as voices that refuse to be decorative. Ma, ha, the Morrigan, Bav, Nev, On. Names that cluster around battle in ways that can sound frightening if told with a harsh drumbeat. For Sleep, we let their presence be the presence of consequence. The knowledge that a land is not won only on a front line, but in the weaving of law, lineage, and care that must follow, if anything like peace is to survive a season. Even the landscape participates as more than backdrop. A plain remembers footsteps. Soil holds rain differently after many feet have crossed it. The mythic imagination often treats Ireland as a participant, not a stage prop. Hills that witness, rivers that refuse to hurry, coastlines that remind mortals and immortals alike that the sea always has another chapter in its pocket. If your thoughts drift toward conflict in your own life, not on a battlefield but in smaller rooms. Let the tale offer distance rather than instruction. You do not have to compare your struggles to mythic scale. You can borrow only the pacing. Breathe, prepare, act with as little harm as your situation allows, then tend what breaks, including your own nervous system. When the great clash resolves into aftermath, the stories sometimes slow in a merciful way. Wounds are dressed, bodies are named, because naming is a kind of honouring. The living learn again that victory is not the same as ease, that relief can arrive with grief braided in, that a harp might sound different the day after a battle, softer, as if the strings had learned humility. Victory in myth is rarely the end. The Tuatha Dé Danann win, yet later stories tell of new invaders, new ages, the coming of the Juns, the mortal Gaels whose poets will claim descent and whose arrival shifts the Tuatha Dé Danann into a different mode of existence. For tonight we pause before that long sequel. We let the aftermath be relief, bodies tending bodies, fields imagining harvest, music returning to harps without urgency. If you are resting in bed, let your own breathing borrow a little from the rhythm of waves. In, out, nothing forced, nothing to prove. If you are sitting, let your shoulders remember the softness you gave them earlier, the unclenching along the upper back, the freedom at the neck. After the great battles, myth often does what healthy minds do. It looks for a way to live with memory. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in many tellings, do not simply vanish when the world changes. They withdraw into she mounds, into the hollow hills, into a parallel Ireland that exists beside the visible one, separated by mist rather than by miles. This is one of the gentlest ideas in the tradition, that wonder does not die, it steps sideways. The she, often anglicised as she, are not only fairy forts and fields, they are narrative machines. Time moves differently. Beauty stings less and hurts more subtly. Music can trap a listener in joy that is not quite safe, yet even that danger can be told softly as longing rather than threat. For sleep, we emphasize hospitality, imagined as warm halls, lanterns, dogs sleeping by hearths, voices speaking low. Mana, non-Maclear, lord of the sea roads between worlds, fairy souls and stories across watery thresholds. He wraps the she in enchantment, in some accounts, making them invisible to casual eyes. You can picture him less as a plot device and more as mist itself, given a courteous face. The sense that the world has layers you will not map on a single afternoon. The children of the Tuatha Dé Danann become the she-folk of later folklore, the good people, capricious and beautiful, bound by strange etiquette. Christianity's arrival in Ireland does not erase these stories, it negotiates with them, as Ireland negotiates with weather. Saints meet she-princes, bells mark boundaries, holy springs neighbour older wells. For tonight, we need not chart an every conversion narrative. We can notice coexistence, the way a culture keeps its dream life like a second language. The treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann continue to echo. The Lee Foil remains a symbol of legitimacy. The spear and sword and cauldron become emblems in poetry, reminders that power is tool as well as title. In sleep stories, tools matter because they extend care, feeding, defending, establishing right order. You can let those objects be metaphors without squeezing them into lectures. A cauldron can be a heart. A stone can be conscience. A spear can be clarity. Giob New, the smith, Credne, the bronze worker, look to the carpenter. Myth gives craft its saints, its specialists, a sense that civilization is shared work. The sound of a hammer can be a heartbeat of community, not a threat when the work serves life. Even if your own labour has been invisible lately, the tale can remind you without demanding gratitude that making is a form of love. In the she-halls of later imagination, hospitality behaves like weather you must not insult. A seat offered, a cup filled, bread broken with attention. Folklore fills the margins with warnings about saying thank you too loudly, about dancing too long, about eating fairy food, not because the world is only trap, but because stories love boundaries the way rivers love banks. Without them, meaning spills everywhere and becomes noise. For sleep, we translate those warnings into softness. The idea that gifts sometimes ask for respect rather than greed. That beauty can be a guest in your evening rather than a master of your night. You can listen to such tales the way you listen to rain. Patterns without obligation. Time in the she is famously unreliable in human terms. A night of music becomes years outside, or the reverse, depending on which story wishes to teach patience. The emotional lesson is gentler than the arithmetic. That joy and sorrow both distort clocks. That love refuses to be managed like a ledger. That rest and longing can stretch an hour into a season inside the heart. Man a Nawan's cloak, in some accounts, divides Ireland from the stranger's eye, making truth shimmer like heat above road. You can picture that cloak as mercy for what cannot be explained quickly. The way trauma hides ordinary rooms, the way wonder hides ordinary hills. Not everything needs to be visible to be real. The Tuatha Dé Danann's withdrawal sets a template repeated in Irish story. Defeat that is not annihilation, retreat that is not cowardice, persistence in another key. Later generations will map politics onto older myths, will read invasions and colonization into layered texts, will argue about what really happened. For your breathing body tonight, none of that debate is urgent. What matters is the feeling tone. That a culture can keep its inner light even when outer power shifts. That stories can be a homeland when borders move. Offerings at fairy forts, flowers, milk, quiet words. Folk practice echoes something ancient. The sense that courtesy extends beyond humans. Whether you read that as psychology or poetry, the gesture is humble. The world is larger than its shopping lists. Sleep stories belong in that humility. There are also tales of changelings and stolen mortals. Darker threads in the weave. We will not pull those threads tight tonight. We acknowledge them as part of the tradition's honesty. That not every otherworldly beauty is safe, that enchantment can confuse boundaries. Then we return to the wider mood. Mist as softener, music as invitation rather than capture, the she as a metaphor for imagination's persistence when empires fall. Rivers named after goddesses, hills named after battles, wells named after eyes. Ireland's maps in story is a poem written slowly across centuries. You can travel it without a compass by listening to sound. Bo-un becomes the Boyne's music. Sinan's story becomes a river's patience. The Tuatha Dé Danann float behind such names like a chord under a melody. Not always visible, always shaping. If you have ever felt out of time, too old too fast, or too young too long, the she's elastic hours can feel like companionship rather than warning. You are not failing a clock invented for factories. You are a creature who needs night as well as day, drift as well as decision. The D.H. Goose harp, ooh, ahun, yeah, sings modes that reshape emotion. Joy music, sorrow music, sleep music. In a tale meant for night. We lean toward the third mode naturally, not as manipulation but as kinship. The story wants to belong to the same rhythm your body craves. Etienne's story, among those connected to the she world, winds through transformation and patience, love moving through strange shapes across years. You do not need every twist tonight. You can hold the emotional outline. Devotion that does not insist on speed, beauty that survives awkward forms, time as river rather than whip. Jeer and Étain, Oisin's later journeys, connections to Tir na Nog, the Tuatha Dé Danann's world spills into adjacent tales like tributaries. For sleep, we let those names be distant music. What matters is the sense that Ireland's mythology is a conversation, not a single file. Scholars debate origins, Indo-European parallels, euhemerized gods, medieval Christian framing in manuscripts. Your nervous system does not need to adjudicate. It needs spacious language, slow transitions, the feeling that understanding can arrive without a test. If your thoughts drift toward your own hidden places, your own inner halls behind the everyday facade, let those thoughts be held gently. The She are not only hills, they are also the places in you where imagination stays alive when practicality has done its shift. Seasons turn in myth the way seasons always have. Winter stories told at fires, spring stories of return. Summer stories of abundance, autumn stories of harvest and warning. The Tuatha Dé Danann move through that cycle, less as statues and more as moods. The skillful hand in harvest, the fair voice in judgment, the harp string trembling with the restrained power. There is companionship in their collective presence, even when companionship looks like many talents arguing softly about the best way to help. A pantheon, in the gentlest sense, is a community of gifts, not a hierarchy meant to shame mortals. You can belong to the listener's bench without needing to be extraordinary. Angus Og, the Macoch, young love and dream, moves through related tales like a warm draft under a door. Not violence, but longing, the sense that beauty in Irish myth is not only a prize, but a path. His stories touch swans and time, borrowed rooms and stolen kisses, the kind of romance that asks patience from the listener. For sleep, we let love be moonlit water rather than a plot twist. Wide, reflective, slow. Beoch Un, linked to the river and to wonder, belongs to the older waters of the imagination, the part of Ireland that feels older than argument. Her steps and the well's betrayal in the deeper myths are not for tonight's close detail. We keep only the river's sound, steady, forgiving, willing to carry what falls in, without needing to judge it first. The DHQ's relationships in myth are sometimes earthy, humorous, human in their messiness, desire, family, awkwardness at a feast. That earthiness keeps the Tuatha Dé Danann from floating away into pure symbol. It reminds us that even luminous peoples need bread, need warmth, need forgiveness for mistakes made while tired. If your own life has mess in it tonight, the myth's tolerance for contradiction can be a kind of gentle mirror, not a spotlight. Cities in myth behave like promises. Findius and Gorius, Murius and Phaelius, carrying spear, sword, cauldron, stone into Ireland's story like four cardinal virtues dressed as objects. You can walk toward them in imagination as four horizons, each one a different kind of mastery. Legitimacy, clarity, protection, nourishment. You do not have to rank them. You can let them stand in a circle around you like standing stones, patient, older than your to-do list. There is also, woven through the tradition, a respect for learning that feels almost like tenderness. O Geum's lines in wood, verses memorized by firelight, law spoken slowly enough that a community can hear itself think. The Tuatha Dé Danann's Ireland is not only a place of wonders, but a place of protocols. How guests are greeted, how kings are chosen, how injuries are compensated, how music is timed so it does not become a whip. Sleep stories can borrow that tenderness without becoming a lecture. Simply the mood of a world that believes order can be beautiful. If your thoughts drift toward learning, toward skills you wish you had, toward languages you meant to study. Let those thoughts be held gently. The tale is not measuring you. It is offering a wide hall where many arts can sit side by side without competing for a single chair. There are nights when the she feel close, not as threat but as nearness of imagination. A tune you almost recognize, a face in a crowd that reminds you of something older than your name. The Tuatha Dé Danann live in that almost, in the shimmer at the edge of sense. You can rest there without solving it. Evening after evening, the land repeats its simple lessons. Mist, stillness, the way darkness gathers without slamming a door. The tales receive those lessons until receiving becomes ritual. Not empty repetition, but comfort. The way a song can steady a frightened mind. The myth is not finished. The she still lie under fields. Whether you believe them literal or not, the stories still circulate, needing neither laboratory nor permission. Rest in that in-between space with us a little longer, where the tale has room to widen, where the night is large enough for wonder without clamour, where the next breath comes as reliably as the last. Before we drift toward the deepest part of night, linger with one more image of mist. Not as concealment for harm, but as mercy for the world's sharp lines. A softness that lets you see silhouettes instead of blades. Distances instead of deadlines. The mist, if you are still with it in imagination, has grown quieter and deeper. The urgent sounds of daybirds have given way to a softer hush, the kind that fills a valley when the wind rests. Here nothing races, everything turns gently, slowly, as if the world had decided to think in longer sentences. Your breath can follow that widening. Inhale without grabbing at air. Exhale without pushing it away. Let the space between breaths be a kind of still pool too, untroubled, sufficient. If your body has found a comfortable position, there is nothing more you need to change. If something itches or aches slightly, you need not battle it. Notice it the way you might notice a leaf touching the surface of a pond, then return to the wide pool of your attention, soft at the edges, easy in the middle. Let your hips feel heavy if you are lying down, as if the mattress were moss and earth supporting your weight completely. Let your legs be long and loose, feet allowed to fall outward slightly, toes uncurled. Let your belly rise and fall with breath without any special effort. Let your arms rest where they fall, elbows soft, hands empty of purpose. Shoulders again, if they have tightened. Let them melt downward, heavy as hills resting under mist, secure and still. Neck long, jaw unclenched, face smooth. The story you heard does not require you to remember every battle or every manuscript variant. It asked only for your willingness to travel beside it for a while, to let Irish mist and Irish dreaming touch your night without demanding anything in return. If your mind wants to revisit the tale, let it revisit in fragments. Light on water, a harp string's tremor, a stone's patient witness, a cauldron's steam rising like a small cloud. None of these images needs to sharpen into detail. They can blur the way a shoreline blurs in fog, present but gentle. Let your jaw relax if it has tightened. Let your forehead smooth. Let your breath slow until it feels like something you are not doing so much as receiving. The way you receive shade when you step under a tree. If there is a small knot of tension in your lower back, you need not wrestle it. Imagine warmth spreading there slowly, like sunlight finding a patch of ground after a long morning. Imagine your legs as heavy as stones, resting on soft earth. Not pinned, not trapped, only supported. Outside the myth, in the living world, Ireland's hills and fields remain places you could visit with boots and time. Ancient mounds still hold their curves against the sky. The sea still brings weather. None of that needs your action now. You have done enough for this day by arriving here, by breathing, by letting your thoughts grow slower. The land itself, beyond any single story, holds a long memory of rain. Grass bends and rises, rivers move toward the sea without rush, even when they seem fast. Nothing in that hidden work needs you to manage it tonight. You can belong to the larger pattern simply by resting. Simply by letting your nervous system believe for a little while that the world will keep turning without your supervision. Let any remaining tension in your brow smooth away. Let your tongue rest softly in your mouth. Let your eyes behind closed lids feel heavy as stones warmed by sun. No effort, no watching. Only the gentle permission to stop looking for lessons. Imagine moonlight, if you like, laying a path across a plain until the grass looks like silver thread. Imagine mist gathering so lightly that the far trees become a suggestion rather than a fact. Imagine a she-hill rounded like a breath, held gently. Proof that quietness can persist without needing an audience. Imagine, too, the sound you are not hearing, wind high above mist, so constant it becomes a kind of silence. Imagine that silence as a blanket you can pull up to your chin, not to hide from the world, but to meet it more softly, without the sharp edges of planning. If thoughts arrive about tomorrow, you need not solve them. Place them on a leaf in your mind and let the current carry them around the bend. They can wait there until morning, if morning asks for them. Many worries in daylight shrink on their own when they are not fed through the night with tension. If sleep is near, you do not have to chase it. Sleep arrives the way mist arrives, not always with announcement, sometimes with a softness you cannot name, sometimes after a long waiting you stopped measuring. Let your eyelids feel heavier. Let your thoughts become simple ripples that grow smaller and smaller until the water is glass again. You might notice the slowing of your heartbeat, not as a thing to measure, but as a distant drum becoming gentler. You might notice warmth in your hands as vessels widen and hold less tightly to the day. You might notice the room's small sounds, a house settling, fabric shifting, and find them harmless, even friendly part of the night's texture, rather than interruptions. The river meets the sea in the long geography of dreams, and the sea does not ask the river to explain its journey. Your breathing meets the night the same way, without needing an explanation. In and out, a little slower, a little softer. Between breaths there is a small stillness. Rest in that stillness without naming it. It is enough like a pool under stars, dark, deep, dependable. It is enough like a place where light gathers without breaking. So let the words end here, or let them blur into sound, or let them stop while your breath continues. Simple and faithful. The Irish landscape, real and imagined, holds its mounds and its shores. Your room holds you. Sleep, when it comes, will hold you too, gently, without instruction, like mist holding moonlight. If you need a last image, let it be simple. A line of hills fading into pale air, empty of hurry, the faintest shimmer, where the Tuatha Dé Danann's story touches the world and becomes dream. You do not have to walk to the horizon. You can let the path continue without you, while you remain here, warm, still, unwinding. If you are still awake, that is not failure. Resting is allowed even when consciousness lingers like a lantern left on low. You can stay in the wide calm of this story, floating, while the world outside your window keeps its own hours. You can let the words become music without meaning, sound without task, a murmur like water over stone. If you prefer silence, you can let the narration end in your mind and remain only with breath, only with the soft weight of blankets, only with the knowledge that nothing in this moment requires proof. The Tuatha Dé Danann have already done their work as a story. They have brought you here, to the edge of sleep, to the quiet island where thoughts grow thin. You might imagine your room as a small hall off a larger landscape, sheltered from wind, brushed by the same peace that holds hidden hills at dusk. You might imagine your breath as a tiny breeze, enough to move a leaf, not enough to disturb depth. You might imagine your mind as surface water, slowly stilling until reflection becomes clear, then irrelevant, then unnecessary. And if you drift, let the drift be gentle. Let dreams be mild. If dreams come, let the legend live on in the deep place where myths live, needing neither praise nor proof. Let the mist stand whether you dream of it or not. Let the night go on being night, faithful, patient, older than argument. If you notice one last stray thought, treat it like a feather on the surface. There, then carried aside by a breath of wind. The pool of your attention is wide enough. The night is patient. The body knows how to slide towards sleep the way a boat slides from shore when the rope loosens. Not all at once, but with a motion that feels inevitable once it begins. There is nothing more you must learn from this episode to deserve rest. There is nothing more you must prove to the landscape of your own mind. You listened. That is enough. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in the end, are not only figures in a manuscript, they are part of Ireland's long practice of remembering that light can be soft, that skill can be sacred, and that withdrawal can be a kind of grace when the world grows too loud for wonder. The night holds you, the story holds you, until you no longer need the words, only the stillness, only the slow current carrying you toward morning, without hurry, without noise, without anything but rest. When morning comes, it can come as slowly as this tale prefers. You do not have to meet it with a list. You can meet it the way mist meets light. Gradually, edges first, then the whole quiet width of day. That is later. This is now. Now is for drifting, for softening, for letting the shoulders go one last time, for trusting that stories can end gently and still leave sweetness behind. The hills, the shores, and the old tales keep their places in the world, whether you dream of them or not. You have borrowed their calm for a little while. You can return it with gratitude that does not need words, only rest. Good night.